Hey everyone, we're here for another quick conversation for the long haul of leadership with Todd Bolsinger, and we're going to look at a quote today from Tim Alberta. This is from episode 234, so not too long ago. It's titled Political Power and American Evangelicalism. And here's the quote. Here's what Tim said. He said, "What I kept coming back to was this immense pressure on pastors to be more than a pastor. In other words, their congregants, in so many cases, are looking to them in this moment saying, okay, so what about masking? What about the vaccine? What about the trans issue? What about abortion? About everything. They start to view their pastor as sort of a part-time pastor and also a kind of part-time pundit, a part-time cultural commentator, part-time prognosticator of world events." There's a lot there. Let me just read it one more time real quick so we all kind of get that in our heads. He said, "What I kept coming back to was this immense pressure on pastors to be more than a pastor. In other words, their congregants in so many cases are looking to them in this moment saying, okay, so what about masking? What about the vaccine? What about the trans issue? What about abortion? About everything. They start to view their pastor as sort of a part-time pastor, but also a kind of part-time pundit, a part-time cultural commentator, a part-time prognosticator of world events." Okay, so Todd, I think that Tim is capturing the pressure that pastors feel, especially in a time like this, an election season like we're in right now. There's this pressure to have answers about everything. And so the question that maybe we can talk about is, how can pastors manage this kind of pressure in a healthy way?
Yeah, it's such a great question, especially for right now, because one of the things we know is that when pastors start pretending to be part-time pastors and become part-time experts and commentators on lots of things, you will gather a lot of people who agree with you.
Yeah, right.
And we've seen this a lot where there's a seduction to wanting to be the expert who tells people this is exactly the truth. I know it about everything.
Yeah.
And the truth is we need to be much more honest about that.
Yeah.
So one of the things, this podcast is part of a seminary work. And one of the things I often say is everybody who comes to a seminary, someone says, you're the best Christian I know. You should grow. You should go off to a professional Christian school. And they come out with a Master of Divinity as one of the degrees.
Yeah.
And they are experts in certain things, like handling the scriptures, or handling people's souls, or teaching people to pray. But what we tend to think is we all want there to be some expert who will answer all of our questions and make it all simple. Yeah. And usually when pastors take in that's a seduction that ultimately keeps us from actually shepherding people into their own growth.
Right. Part of the challenge is also that you have, especially when it comes to like the political stuff that Tim is talking about, you've got people on different sides of an issue. And so there's that tension between different desires, different agendas. And so how do we then, that's another question, right? How do we navigate those kinds of tensions?
Yeah. It's really interesting because very often what people are looking for is you to baptize their position.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's very tempting, especially if you live in an area where many people think mostly alike. Yeah. And then you end up wanting God to baptize your position. Where over and over again, Jesus told people to listen to the marginalized, listen to the other. Like we were told throughout the New Testament, it's always about listening to the person who's oftentimes not listened to, right? Yeah. So what happens is that to be a Christian, which is to be a follower of Jesus, oftentimes means confronting the assumptions of the world that want power and security and all those good things that we want in the world. And that's really hard. It's hard. It's one of the most difficult parts of leadership that are called to disappoint people and help them also to grow.
Yeah. To disappoint them and to help them to grow. That's the hard part. And again, in this context that we're in right now, to say it's not about Democrat or Republican, right? It's about the way of Jesus. Right. That can be really disappointing to some people. Some people might love that. Right. And so that's great. But some people will find that really disappointing. One of the other things that he kind of addressed in this interview that I did with Tim a little bit ago was this sorting that has happened in churches, where people with different political ideals have sorted into different kinds of churches. And so then you've got pastors who maybe even have a majority of people who have a particular position.
Yeah.
And so just maybe one last thought on, okay, what if, when you really feeling this pressure, and how can we stay faithful then, maybe in our own selves, that have the inner strength perhaps to be the kind of pastor that people need, even when they're saying, but this way, do it this way, say this, say what I want you to say.
Yeah. So one of the reasons why I wrote the little book, How Not to Waste a Crisis, you got it right behind you.
Oh, I do, actually. I noticed that I was looking at my thing.
that in a crisis, everybody wants you to be the expert. And why they want you to be the expert is so that they don't have to change.
Yeah.
What you have to realize is your responsibility is to take people through the deep changes that the crisis might bring.
Yeah.
And for most people, we are disappointed when our leaders confront us with our need to change.
Yeah.
So what you have to hold on to is, what is your mission? That's the other book, The Mission Always Wins, right?
Yeah.
What is your mission? What is your purpose? And our purpose is not to please people. And it's certainly not to become some kind of like Christian voice for a particular party or group of people or the state. It's to actually be faithful in helping people follow Jesus.
Yeah.
And that's going to be, it's very difficult when we get into really highly anxious moments.
Yeah. And that's where maybe relationships, which you've talked about at other times, relationships with people, partners, the three people, the groups, right, that supports you in the different ways. Yeah.
Yeah. Having partners and mentors and friends.
That's right.
I think one of the biggest things for pastors is to be able to acknowledge. I say the first most important skill for a good leader is to be able to look people in the eye when they ask you a question and honestly be able to say, I don't know. Yeah. But I'm willing to learn, and we're going to actually have to grow together. That's very disappointing when people want a quick fix, or they want their particular viewpoint baptized as God's answer.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Let me read the quote one more time. Tim Alberta, episode 234, he said, "What I kept coming back to was this immense pressure on pastors to be more than a pastor. In other words, their congregants in so many cases are looking to them in this moment saying, okay, so what about masking? What about the vaccine? What about the trans issue? What about abortion? What about, about everything? They start to view their pastor as sort of a part-time pastor, but also a kind of part-time pundit, a part-time cultural commentator, part-time prognosticator of world events."